It was a crisp Saturday morning in New Jersey, the kind of morning that smelled of fresh-cut grass and ambition. The academy fields of MLS Next were already alive with shouts, whistles, and the thud of soccer balls ricocheting off cleats. Parents leaned against metal fences with coffee cups in hand, bundled in jackets against the early chill. Coaches scribbled notes on clipboards, eyes darting from one young prospect to another, looking for sparks of potential that might turn into scholarships, contracts, maybe even the professional dream. Among the dozens of players lacing up their boots on Field 4, one figure stood out, though not in the way he might have hoped. Mathis Henry, 16 years old, son of Thierry Henry, had inherited the lean frame and graceful stride of his father. His touch on the ball was velvet, the kind of instinctive control that made older scouts whisper to each other. Yet as he tied his laces, there was a hesitation in his movements, a nervous flicker in his eyes. Mathis had learned early on that being Henry's son was a blessing and a curse. It opened doors, yes, but it also drew targets on his back. In locker rooms, whispers followed him. Daddy got him in. He's soft. Golden boy. The jealousy had been there since he was 12, but now at 16, the whispers had sharpened into actions. And this morning, as he jogged onto the field, he could already feel the chill of isolation even under the rising sun. The whistle blew. The scrimmage began. At first, the ball zipped around as usual, short passes, quick touches, bursts of speed. Mathis positioned himself as the number 10, just behind the striker, waiting to link play. He darted into open space, signaling for the ball with a clap of his hands. But his teammate looked at him, hesitated, and passed backward instead. Mathis frowned but kept running. Minutes later, he checked back again, wide open. Same result. The ball went anywhere but to him. It wasn't new. It had been happening for weeks. At first he thought it was coincidence, then maybe just poor chemistry. But now he knew better. They were freezing him out. His own teammates, some of them jealous of his name, others afraid of the alpha boys who led the bullying, were cutting him from the game. On the sideline, a man in a fitted black jacket and jeans watched quietly, hands tucked into his pockets. David Beckham, retired legend, co-owner of Inter Miami, had stopped by on his way through New York. He liked watching youth games, liked spotting the raw edges of talent, but today something else caught his eye. He knew Henry's boy by face. Everyone in football did. But Beckham noticed the body language. The raised hand ignored, the shrugging shoulders, the way Mathis forced a smile even as his runs went unnoticed. Beckham narrowed his eyes. He'd seen that before years ago in academy dressing rooms from London to Los Angeles. It wasn't bad positioning. It wasn't laziness. It was exclusion. On the field, the ball finally came Mathis's way. He trapped it neatly, spun, and tried to drive forward. Almost instantly, a teammate crashed into him with a late tackle. The whistle blew, but instead of apologies, there were smirks. Mathis got up slowly, brushing dirt off his shorts, jaw tight. Nobody offered a hand. From the fence, a group of parents murmured. Most saw only a clumsy challenge. But Beckham saw the glance exchanged between the tackler and another boy, the quick grin, the conspiratorial nod. His gut twisted. He knew bullying when he saw him. Mathis tried again, pressing higher. When the striker finally laid a ball off to him, it was too heavy, bouncing out of reach. Groans rose from the sideline. A coach scribbled something negative. The striker threw up his hands dramatically as if to say, "See? He can't keep up." Mathis's face flushed crimson. He wanted to scream. He wanted to tell them he hadn't even had a fair chance. But instead he swallowed it. That's what he always did. Swallow it, keep quiet, go home and pretend. Because what would he say to his father? Thierry Henry, the legend, the man whose name echoed in European stadiums, who now carried the aura of wisdom and success. Mathis feared that if he admitted he was being targeted, it would sound like weakness. He didn't want pity. He didn't want his father to think he couldn't handle the pressure. So he hid it. Every day. The scrimmage ended. Mathis trudged toward the sideline, head down, while the boys who had cut him out of play laughed together. He overheard one of them whisper loudly enough for him to catch, "Guess Daddy can't buy you chemistry, huh?" Another chuckled. The words burned, but Mathis kept his lips pressed shut. Beckham followed with his eyes, quiet as ever. He'd been famous since he was barely older than these kids. He knew what jealousy looked like. He knew what envy could do inside a locker room. And he knew the weight of silence. Later in the parking lot, Mathis walked alone, gear slung over his shoulder. The other boys piled into SUVs with parents greeting them warmly. Mathis's mother wasn't there today. Thierry had been traveling for pundit work. So the boys simply walked, shoulders hunched. Beckham, leaning against his car a few spaces down, noticed again. He almost stepped forward but stopped himself. Not yet. Kids didn't open up to strangers, even if that stranger was David Beckham. That night, in a quiet apartment, Mathis sat at the kitchen table, homework spread before him. His phone buzzed with messages, group chats, photoshopped images of him missing easy goals, memes captioned, "Daddy's boy." He scrolled, face pale. He wanted to smash the phone, but he couldn't. He simply closed the app and buried the device under his pillow. In London, decades earlier, Beckham remembered being hazed in similar ways, though not as cruel, not as public. Social media had changed everything. Now shame wasn't just in the locker room. It was global, viral, permanent. The next morning, Beckham returned to the academy fields, though he had no official reason. He stood again at the fence. Mathis arrived, quiet, isolated. The pattern repeated, no passes, subtle shoves, mocking laughter. Beckham's chest tightened. He didn't know yet how, but he felt a responsibility forming. At lunch, Beckham slipped into the cafeteria where players gathered. He kept a low profile, baseball cap pulled down, but his eyes scanned. He caught sight of Mathis at the far end of a table, tray untouched, while three teammates whispered and snickered. One deliberately knocked over Mathis's water bottle as he walked by. Mathis bent silently to pick it up. Beckham clenched his jaw. He could intervene now, but he held back. He needed to understand the full picture. He needed to know how deep it ran, who was leading it, and how best to stop it without making Mathis's life harder. Because sometimes defending someone publicly only gave bullies more fuel. That evening, Beckham made a call. "Thierry? It's David. Yeah, I'm still stateside. Listen, have you noticed anything off with Mathis lately?" On the other end, Henry sounded puzzled. "Off? No, what? He's been quieter maybe, but that's just teenage stuff, right? He's working hard." Beckham hesitated. He could have said it all right then. But he knew Henry. Knew the pride, the blind spots, the fatherly belief that his son would speak up if something were truly wrong. So Beckham just said, "Keep an eye, mate. I've seen little things at training. Could just be nothing, but you know how kids can be." Henry sighed. "Teenagers. Thanks, Dave. I'll talk to him." But Beckham doubted Mathis would open up. He saw the boy's silence, his fear of disappointing his father. He'd lived that dynamic himself in different ways. And so, as the sun dipped below the skyline of Manhattan that night, Beckham made a quiet decision. He would watch. He would gather proof. And when the moment was right, he would step in. Not just as a legend, not just as a friend of the family, but as someone who knew what it meant to carry unfair weight at a young age. For Mathis, the bullying continued, each jab another invisible bruise. For Beckham, the mission had just begun. The following week at the academy, the sky stretched gray and heavy, a low ceiling of clouds pressing down on the training ground. The players jogged out onto the damp turf, cleats crunching against wet grass, chatter bouncing back and forth. But amid the noise, Beckham noticed again. Mathis trailing behind, shoulders tight, face set like stone. Beckham had become almost invisible to the staff and parents by now. People were used to him showing up at games, smiling politely, chatting with coaches about youth development in the US. They assumed he was scouting or just indulging his passion for grassroots soccer. Nobody questioned why he kept returning, notebook in hand, cap pulled low. But Beckham wasn't taking notes on drills or tactics. He was documenting moments. A ball withheld, a shove in the box, a smirk shared between teammates after Mathis stumbled from a trip. He filled pages with small observations that, alone, might look trivial. Together, they painted a darker picture. One afternoon, Beckham positioned himself by the training facility entrance. From the open windows above the locker room, voices drifted. "Man, he only got here 'cause his dad's Thierry Henry. Yeah, golden ticket kid. Thinks he's special. He misses on purpose, watch. He ain't even trying." The laughter that followed wasn't the laughter of boys teasing each other. It was sharp, targeted, designed to wound. Beckham's jaw tightened. He'd heard enough locker room banter in his career to know the difference between ribbing and cruelty. He scribbled the quotes into his notebook. Proof. Words mattered. That evening, Beckham approached one of the younger assistant coaches in the parking lot. The man was mid-20s, fresh out of college, eager, but with the uncertain air of someone still finding his footing in authority. "Rough session today," Beckham said casually. The coach smiled nervously. "Yeah, kids can be competitive. You notice how isolated Henry's boy is?" Beckham asked, his tone soft but deliberate. The coach hesitated. "I mean, he's got talent, no doubt. But sometimes the team doesn't click with him. You know how it is." Beckham's eyes met his. Sometimes it's more than not clicking. Sometimes it's bullying. You see it? The coach shifted, uneasy. He wanted to say yes. Beckham could read it in his face. But fear or maybe politics held him back. Finally, the man muttered, I can't comment, before hurrying to his car. Beckham exhaled. Silence again. Adults afraid to intervene, leaving kids to fend for themselves. Over the next days, Beckham deepened his quiet investigation. He talked to groundskeepers, cafeteria staff, anyone who might have noticed small things. Most shrugged, but one cafeteria worker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, lowered her voice when Beckham asked. "That Henry boy," she whispered, "always eats alone. Never causes trouble, but those other boys, they walk by, knock his tray sometimes. I tell them to cut it out, but they laugh." "Did you report it?" Beckham asked. She shook her head. "Boys will be boys, they say. But I got a son too. I know the difference between boys being silly and boys being cruel." Beckham thanked her, his conviction hardening. Meanwhile, Mathis continued to wear his mask. To his father, over FaceTime calls, he smiled. "Yeah, training's good. Working hard." Thierry Henry, thousands of miles away, nodded proudly, unaware of the weight behind his son's eyes. Beckham knew Mathis would never tell. The boy's silence was his shield and his prison. One rainy afternoon, Beckham lingered near the indoor practice dome. From behind the glass, he watched Mathis walk into the tunnel alone. Two teammates followed, voices low but sharp. Beckham leaned closer. "Think you're better than us? You only play 'cause of your daddy." Mathis shook his head. "That's not true." "Shut up." A shove against the wall. Mathis stumbled. Beckham's fists clenched. He almost stormed in, but he forced himself still. If he rushed it, the boys would deny everything. Mathis might even get hurt worse for being protected. Beckham needed strategy. He needed undeniable truth. He pulled out his phone and quietly hit record, capturing muffled audio through the glass. Not perfect, but enough to prove intent. That night, Beckham reviewed the clip. You could hear the sneers, the shove, Mathis's voice breaking as he insisted, "That's not true." Beckham replayed it until his chest ached. He decided then, he would build a case not just against the bullies but for Mathis's dignity. The following weekend brought another scrimmage, this time with parents filling the sidelines. Beckham positioned himself near Thierry, who had flown in for the game. Henry was animated, shouting encouragement in his thick accent. He didn't notice the subtle freeze-outs, the way teammates avoided Mathis, the deliberate passes skipped. Beckham did. Every detail. Midway through the match, Mathis made a clever run, perfectly timed. He was open. The winger saw him, Beckham was sure of it, but instead blasted the ball out of bounds. The crowd groaned. Henry muttered under his breath, disappointed. Mathis lowered his head, shoulders sinking. Beckham glanced at Henry, whose face tightened with frustration. Beckham knew what he was thinking. Why doesn't my boy take his chances? Why doesn't he demand the ball? The truth was, Mathis had been denied those chances again and again. After the game, Beckham walked with Henry toward the lot. "Your boy's good," Beckham said carefully. Henry nodded, though his voice carried worry. "He's got talent, but sometimes he looks invisible out there. Doesn't assert himself." Beckham stopped. "He's not invisible. He's being made invisible." Henry frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Beckham wanted to spill everything. But he saw Mathis walking toward them, head down, dragging his bag. Now wasn't the time. "Just watch closely," Beckham said softly. "You'll see." Henry raised an eyebrow but said nothing. That night, Beckham began piecing together the fragments he'd collected. Notes, quotes, video snippets, eyewitness whispers. Alone they were fragile. Together they formed a narrative of systematic bullying. He planned to show it not just to Henry but to the academy, the staff, the parents, anyone who could force change. But he knew he had to be careful. Exposed too soon and the boys would deny it, turn the tables, claim Mathis was weak. Wait too long and Mathis's spirit might break. The next morning, Beckham made a decision. He would set the stage himself. He approached the head coach with an idea. How about a Parents' Day scrimmage? Let families see the boys in action. Transparency builds trust. The coach, flattered by Beckham's involvement, agreed readily. Great idea. We'll set it up next weekend. Beckham nodded, hiding the fire in his chest. Next weekend, under the watchful eyes of every parent, including Henry, he would let the truth shine. But until then he kept watching. He kept collecting. And every time Mathis walked alone, every time he bore cruelty in silence, Beckham's resolve deepened. Because he remembered being that boy. because he knew what it meant to carry a famous name and still feel unseen, and because sometimes the greatest victories weren't won with goals or trophies. They were won by standing up quietly for those who couldn't stand for themselves. And Beckham was ready. The Saturday arrived with a strange tension in the air. The academy had polished itself for the occasion, trimming hedges, setting out banners that read Parents' Day, building the future of soccer. Folding chairs lined the sidelines, parents clutching coffees and cameras ready to cheer. There was excitement in the crowd, but for Beckham, who stood a few paces back with arms folded, it felt like a courtroom. Today he thought the truth would have no place to hide. Thierry Henry arrived with his gear slung over his shoulder, head slightly bowed as usual. He spotted his father among the gathering parents and managed a faint smile, the kind that tried to say I'm fine without convincing anyone. Thierry, wearing a cap pulled low, clapped his son on the shoulder, whispering something quick in French. Mathis nodded, but Beckham could see the nerves twitching beneath his skin. The boys filed onto the field, cleats tapping against the turf. The whistle blew. From the opening minutes, Beckham recognized the pattern he'd memorized. Mathis darted into space, unmarked, hands ready, but the ball swung the other way. Twice more he moved cleverly, creating open lanes. Twice more he was ignored. Parents clapped, oblivious. A father yelled encouragement for his son on the wing. A mother snapped photos. Only Thierry's eyes narrowed, confusion stirring as he began to notice the gap. Why don't they pass to him? Henry muttered under his breath, loud enough for Beckham to hear. Beckham didn't answer. He wanted Henry to see. Minutes later, Mathis finally received the ball. He turned quickly, feet soft, but almost instantly a teammate lunged with a reckless tackle, sending him sprawling. Gasps rose from the crowd. The referee blew his whistle. Yet instead of helping him up, the boy walked away smirking. Another player snickered. Henry shot up from his chair, outrage flickering. That was deliberate. The coach on the sideline gave a half-hearted shrug. Beckham leaned forward, eyes locked on Henry. Now you see, he thought. Now you feel it. Mathis stood slowly, brushing dirt from his jersey. He bit his lip, holding the sting inside. But when he glanced at the stands and saw his father watching, his chest tightened. The shame he'd been hiding now felt unbearable. Play resumed. This time, Mathis pressed higher, calling for the ball more insistently. The winger received a pass near midfield, looked up, saw Mathis waving wide open. Beckham's gaze sharpened. This was the test. The winger hesitated, then deliberately turned away, dribbling straight into a defender and losing possession. The groan from the crowd was audible. Henry's jaw dropped. He turned to Beckham, voice low but burning. They're freezing him out. Beckham nodded once, slow and grave. Henry's fist clenched. What? What's happening? Beckham's silence spoke volumes. Henry's eyes narrowed, fury and guilt mixing as the realization dawned. At halftime, the players trudged toward the bench. Mathis sat apart, sipping water, eyes down. The group of bullies laughed together, their body language too relaxed, too rehearsed. Beckham slipped closer, pretending to check his phone. Hidden in his pocket, a small camera lens peeked out, capturing the smirks, the deliberate shoulder bumps as they brushed past Mathis. The second half began. Beckham whispered to the head coach, who agreed to switch up formations, putting Mathis in a more advanced role. Let's see his creativity, Beckham suggested, his voice calm but firm. The coach, eager to impress Beckham, complied. The change was immediate and revealing. With space to shine, Mathis made intelligent runs, positioning perfectly. Yet again, passes bypassed him. Beckham, recording discreetly, caught multiple sequences where teammates looked directly at Mathis, then chose harder, riskier options instead. The breaking point came with 10 minutes left. Mathis finally intercepted a ball, danced past two defenders and lined up a shot. Just as he struck, a teammate slid from behind, not to win the ball but to take him. Mathis crashed to the ground, clutching his ankle. The crowd erupted. Parents shouted. The referee blew furiously. Henry leapt to his feet, rage boiling. That was his own teammate. Beckham moved quickly, hand on Henry's shoulder. Let them see. Let them all see. Mathis grimaced, limping to his feet. Tears rimmed his eyes, but he forced himself to stand tall. He didn't want to look weak. He didn't want his father to see him broken. When the final whistle blew, the score didn't matter. What mattered was the weight in the air, the undeniable strangeness, the deliberate isolation that had unfolded in front of dozens of witnesses. Murmurs spread among parents. The cafeteria worker Beckham had spoken to nodded knowingly from the sideline. Even the assistant coach who once avoided comment now shifted uncomfortably. Henry stormed down to the field, pulling Mathis aside. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, voice cracking between anger and anguish. Mathis stared at the grass. "Because you'd think I was weak." Henry froze, the words striking harder than any tackle. "Wait, you think I'd ever?" He stopped, choking back emotion. Beckham stepped forward then, pulling out his phone. "Thierry, look." He played clips, whispered insults captured near the locker room, video of deliberate missed passes, the shove in the tunnel. Henry's eyes widened with each frame, fury and heartbreak mounting. Finally, he looked up at Beckham, his voice trembling. "You knew?" Beckham nodded. "I've been watching. I had to be sure. I didn't want to make things worse for him." Henry turned to his son, pulling him into a fierce embrace. "You should never have carried this alone. Never." Mathis's shoulders shook as he buried his face against his father's chest, tears finally breaking free. Around them, silence fell. Other parents stared, whispers rippling. The head coach, pale, realized the weight of what had just been exposed. Beckham's evidence, Henry's fury, Mathis's pain, it was undeniable. Henry lifted his head, eyes blazing. "This ends now," he declared. "My son will not be humiliated in silence. Not anymore." Beckham placed a steady hand on Henry's shoulder. "And he won't be. We'll make sure of it. Together." For the first time in months, Mathis felt something shift inside. Not victory, not vindication yet, but the sense that he wasn't alone anymore. That the shadows were lifting, one truth at a time. And Beckham, watching father and son cling to each other, knew the hardest part was yet to come. Demanding accountability, ensuring change. But tonight, at least, a crack of light had pierced through. The Monday after Parents' Day was colder than usual. The sky hung heavy, streaked with winter gray, and the academy felt different, as though the truth that had surfaced over the weekend still lingered in the air. Parents whispered in parking lots. Coaches walked briskly, heads bowed. The boys who had laughed the loudest 2 days ago now moved in nervous clusters, their confidence shaken. Beckham arrived early as he often did. He parked his car discreetly, slipped through the gates and stood near the training field. He wasn't here as an owner, a legend, or a celebrity. He was here as a guardian of a boy who had nearly been broken by silence. Mathis walked in a few minutes later, duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His steps were slower, heavier. But today something was different. Thierry Henry walked beside him, tall, imposing, jaw set with determination. The boy glanced at his father, and for the first time in weeks, Beckham noticed a hint of relief in his face, as though carrying this weight was no longer a solitary burden. The coach blew his whistle. Players lined up, but the rhythm of training was awkward. Every drill felt tense. When the ball rolled toward Mathis, one of the boys hesitated, unsure whether to continue the old routine of freezing him out. The head coach barked, "Pass it. Play the game right." The order was sharp, more than professional. It was guilty, defensive, as though the man knew his own negligence had been exposed. Beckham's eyes narrowed. It wasn't enough to force passes. It wasn't enough to pretend nothing had happened. There had to be accountability. At lunch that day, Beckham convened quietly with Thierry Henry in the coach's office. The space smelled of marker ink and old coffee. Training boards lined the walls, magnets representing players, strategies scribbled half-erased. Henry's arms were folded tight across his chest. Beckham placed his phone on the desk, tapping the recordings he'd gathered. "This isn't just banter," Beckham said firmly. "It's bullying. Systematic. You saw it yourself Saturday. If the academy doesn't address it, it'll destroy him, or worse, convince him that he deserves it." Henry's jaw tightened. "And I didn't see it. Not for months. I thought he was just shy, that he needed to toughen up. My own son, and I was blind." His voice cracked, eyes flickering downward. "I'm ashamed." Beckham leaned forward. "Don't blame yourself. He was trying to protect you. He thought telling you would make you disappointed." Henry's fist clenched. "Disappointed? He is my pride. My boy. How could he think that?" "Because," Beckham said quietly, "that's what pressure does. When you carry a famous name, the world assumes you're untouchable. But inside, you feel like every mistake is proof you don't deserve it. I've been there. I know what it's like." Henry's shoulders slumped. For once, the great striker looked less like a legend and more like a father who'd been handed his own failure. He reached up, covering his face with his hands. Beckham let the silence stretch. Finally, Henry looked up, determination burning in his eyes. "So what do we do?" Beckham didn't hesitate. "We demand accountability. Publicly. Not to shame the boys, but to set a line. This academy preaches values, discipline, teamwork, respect. They fail to enforce them. We make sure they never fail again." Henry nodded slowly. "And Mathis?" Beckham's expression softened. "We remind him that this was never his fault. That talent isn't measured by cruelty or silence. And we give him the stage to show the world who he is. Not Thierry's son, not a victim, but Mathis." The next day, Beckham requested a meeting with the academy director. The man, a polished administrator with a tie too tight at the collar, welcomed Beckham and Henry into a conference room. His smile was forced, his tone defensive. "We value every player here," the director began. "There may have been misunderstandings on the field. Boys can be competitive." Beckham cut him off, voice calm but edged with steel. "This wasn't competition. This was targeted abuse. And you know it. The evidence is clear." Henry added, his French accent thickening with anger. "You let it happen under your roof. My son was humiliated day after day and nobody stopped it." The director's smile faltered. "We'll review our protocols." "Not enough," Beckham said. "You will address this openly." The parents saw it. The coaches saw it. Pretending it was nothing will only tell those boys they can get away with it. The director shifted uncomfortably. But Beckham leaned forward, eyes locked. "This academy wants credibility? Then it needs integrity. Start by acknowledging the truth." By the end of the week, the academy held a mandatory assembly. Players, parents, coaches, all gathered in the gymnasium. The air buzzed with unease. Whispers darted between rows of chairs. On the stage stood the director, flanked by staff. He cleared his throat. "We are here today because recent events have brought to light behavior that does not reflect our values. Targeted exclusion, intimidation, and disrespect were directed toward one of our players. This will not be tolerated. Those involved will face consequences. More importantly, we recommit to building an environment where every player is valued, regardless of background." The room stirred. Parents exchanged glances. Some of the guilty boys shifted in their seats, faces pale. In the audience, Mathis sat stiffly, eyes down. Beside him, Thierry placed a hand on his shoulder. Beckham, standing in the back, watched intently. He knew words could be empty. But this moment mattered. It marked the first time the silence had been broken in public. After the assembly, whispers swelled into conversations. Parents approached Henry, some apologetic, others supportive. A few muttered excuses, boys will be boys, but Beckham's glare silenced them quickly. That afternoon, training resumed. The difference was striking. The coach barked at players to involve Mathis. The ball found him more often, and when it did, his talent shone. A quick flick past a defender. A curling shot that kissed the crossbar. A backheel pass that drew a gasp from the sideline. For the first time in months, Mathis played freely. Not perfectly, he still made mistakes, still second-guessed, but there was joy returning to his stride. Henry watched, tears pricking his eyes. He turned to Beckham. "I almost lost him," he whispered. Beckham shook his head. "You didn't?" He just needed to know he wasn't alone. The following weekend brought a showcase match, scouts and parents crowding the stands. It was Mathis's chance and Beckham knew it. From the opening whistle, the boy played with a fire that had been buried. He demanded the ball, drove forward, slipped clever passes. In the second half, he collected the ball just outside the box, danced past one defender, then another, and curled a left-footed strike into the top corner. The crowd erupted. For a moment, the noise was deafening. Mathis sprinted toward the sideline, not to the coaches, not to his teammates, but to his father. Thierry rose, arms open, and Mathis leapt into his embrace. The two clung to each other, tears in their eyes. The stadium, for once, felt like family. From a few steps away, Beckham watched quietly, hands in his pockets. He didn't seek applause. He didn't need thanks. But when Henry looked up, still holding his son, his gaze met Beckham's. For a moment, the two men, once rivals on the pitch, now fathers bound by something deeper, shared a silent acknowledgement. Gratitude, respect, brotherhood. Later that evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, Henry approached Beckham in the parking lot. His voice was raw, thick with emotion. "David," he said, gripping Beckham's hand with both of his, "you saved my boy, and you saved me from my own blindness. I can never repay that." Beckham shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. All I did was stand where someone needed to. The rest, Mathis did himself. He proved who he is." Henry's eyes glistened. "Still, thank you. From a father's heart." Beckham nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Protecting the game means protecting the kids who play it. that's all this was. As Henry walked back to join Mathis, Beckham lingered by his car. The night air was cool, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the field where boys still kicked the ball under the fading light. He closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him, because this was why he stayed connected to the game. Not the trophies, not the fame, not the ownership deals, but the chance to stand in the shadows, to make sure no child bore the weight of cruelty alone. And in that silence, Beckham thought of all the boys out there like Mathis, sons, daughters, dreamers, fighting battles unseen. If even one of them felt less alone because someone chose to notice, then maybe, just maybe, the world of soccer would be a little kinder. The story wasn't about David Beckham, nor Thierry Henry, nor even the bullies who had lost their power. It was about a boy who found his voice again, a father who finally saw, and a friend who refused to look away. And as Mathis Henry laughed with his father under the fading glow, Beckham knew that dignity, once lost, had been restored.